In this screencast, I want to get rid of some of the things that might worry or distract you as you prepare for exams. So I'm going to go through things that we don't need you to do in an unseen exam answer. So first of all, let me tell you what I mean by the unseen exam. This is an exam paper you've not seen in advance. You're being asked to produce an answer within a certain amount of time, and the answers will be either essay answers or maybe short answers, but a narrative structure. So I'm not including here things like, for example, multiple choice tests. Okay, so let's work through the 8 things. If you choose to define every key word in an exam question, it looks like you're not quite sure what you want to say in your answer. It often looks as if you're just warming up for the real answer. We know all the terms that we've used, of course, and we assume you know them. We have confidence that you know the key words that we've used because we're using them to ask you a question. So that's something that you can get out of the habit of if it's a habit you've developed over the years. If you see a quote in an exam question, this is quite common to be given a quote and asked to discuss it. You do have to understand what the quote's trying to say, but don't worry if you can't quite remember where that quote came from. What did that person write? What text did it come from? What we're interested in is what you think about the quote, so don't be put off an answer that would be a really good answer for you just because you can't start your answer by talking knowledgeably about the text on which that quote has been drawn. Academics tend to love quotations. We like students using quotations in exam answers because it anchors you into texts or into papers. It shows that you're really immersed in your subject, so we like them, and we know they really help some students. Some students really enjoy memorising quotations, gives them confidence. Others enjoy it far less, but memorising huge quotations of several lines and then trying to also memorise every single biographical reference for every one of those quotations just takes up huge amounts of time that you don't need to spend when you're revising, but also time that we wasted in an unseen exam answer. So we're asking you to dip into quotations very often, if you can, to support your answer. But we don't need these to be lengthy, they just take up space. And we don't need you to give us, as if it was a coursework assignment, every bibliographical reference of that quotation. You do need to say where you got it from, ideally the year maybe of that text, but nothing more than that. It's tempting, particularly if you feel quite confident about the sort of questions you might get in an exam, to write an ideal exam answer and then memorise the whole thing, or several of them, hoping you're going to get lucky. And when you get in there, there's a question that you can sort of roughly put your answer onto. You can see straight away the problem. You'll end up, chances are, not quite answering the question, and that can be difficult for markers because they can't give you marks for work that's just irrelevant to the question. But also you run the very real risk of, in the exam, under stress, realising that actually you can't remember your whole answer, and so you end up sitting stumped and not sure what to do next. Memorising answers is often a really good idea before the exam, but only in plan form. So if you're going to spend time working up some answers, work them up as plans, and then try to recall those plans as best you can when you're in the exam, because that way you can change your mind, you can strip the plan back a little bit, you can add extra bits in, you'll have much more nimble answers, and you won't have to panic about remembering word for word what you thought sometime prior to the exam. If you're asked to talk about 2 texts or 2 topic areas in an answer, we're not expecting that you will absolutely balance the words in that answer between those 2 texts and those 2 topics. It's only natural that you might feel a greater affinity with one particular point of view, or feel much more comfortable with a certain area of knowledge, or one text you think perfectly fits the argument you're creating, and another one supports it but isn't necessarily as central. We know that's how things work because we're asking you questions and we're asking you to apply your knowledge and to work out a good answer. So please don't worry about having to have the same amount of space in an answer dedicated to 2 or 3 areas. It's fine to flex that a little bit. Having said that, we wouldn't expect you, if you're asked to talk about 2 texts, to give 80% of your answer to a text and mention another one just in passing. It's about getting the balance, but not becoming overly concerned about an absolute equal balance. We don't expect you to have the final word in anything that you're writing about in an exam. And it's important that you know that, because students very often get caught up making a bold statement. So saying Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is not a strong character. And they spend the whole of their answer trying to prove to the marker that Juliet is a very weak character. Now, whilst in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet does have some weaknesses, inevitably she's a character, she'll have strengths as well. What we're looking for is nuanced answers you've thought through. And being able to put in an exam answer that there are other questions that need to be asked and other areas to pursue, and it's not absolutely clear in black and white. That's fine. That's what academic pursuit is all about. So don't find yourself crunched into a corner where you have to make absolute generalisations that don't quite fit the facts because you're trying to give a final word in something. We're looking for an answer that reflects the learning that you've been given on a course or on a module. We're not expecting you to convince us there's only one way of looking at something. It's inevitable that if you're writing to time, even roughly to time, that you won't necessarily be able to complete every single answer. And there is always a temptation to keep on writing and writing to get to the end of the answer, and then realising you've spent 3/4 of the time in an exam writing on one answer and you just physically don't have the time left to go on to another answer and to do it justice. So be strategic here. Plan what you want to say it, and let the time go by. And if you go slightly over, don't panic. But if you realise, and if you've got a plan, you will realise that you actually have wanted to put in too much information for the time that you've allowed, then it's fine to stop. You can make a note at the end of an answer to refer the examiner back to a plan, or make a few bullet points of what you would have said had you had time to answer that question. That's fine, and then move on to the next answer. Much better to divide your time more equally so you get a really good go at both of your answers, rather than finding you're running out of time to do the best work you can do. And finally, and this is the most difficult thing to remember, and particularly when you're revising, you haven't got to know everything about everything. You need to know enough about enough. That is, you're going to have to think about the sort of areas of your module or your course that interest you, the sort of areas you like to be asked about in the exam, and you become strategic, tactical in your thinking and your working. Think about areas that you will come up in the exam. Work on those areas, except that nobody is going to expect that you can cram everything you know, or indeed everything on the module or a course, into your exam answers. So what we need you to do is to be able to know stuff and then to apply it. People often work really hard at their exams and say, I just knew so much and I couldn't use it, and that always happens. It doesn't matter, it's about how you apply what you know. So rather than just learning more and more and more stuff, a useful thing to do in your revision is start to use that stuff. Use your knowledge. Work through some practice plans. Work through some mock exams. See how well what you know will fit the sort of things you're likely to be asked. That's the best way to approach any exam. So I hope that we have given you now 8 fewer things to worry about when you come to the exams.